Hello, for your CNA fans, and welcome to our first episode of NewsFlash Thursday, where we discuss news headlines and how they pertain to healthcare, specifically to the CNA community. Today's episode, I'd like to talk to you about headlines that have made national news, and they concern a young lady who was in a nursing home receiving skilled nursing care, who unexpectedly and quite suddenly gave birth while she was at the facility. Now, can you imagine going to work tomorrow and having one of your patients who you did not think had been sexually active at all suddenly and without warning give birth? And can you imagine the shock that CNA that was taking care of that patient endured? And you can hear it in her voice during the 911 call, how stressed and just completely overwhelmed the CNA was.
Okay. What's the emergency?
Someone just had a baby. One of our patients just had a baby, and we had no idea she was pregnant.
Okay. Is the baby
We were not
out?
prepared for that. Baby's turning blue. We need someone now.
Okay. And the mom is doing okay?
We're not sure. We had no idea this patient was pregnant.
And the nurse actually that worked at the nursing home delivered the infant there at the nursing home. And again, this was not something that she expected to do on that particular day. But I don't really want to talk about the events that led up to the birth. And those are being discussed by news agencies all over the country. And it's reprehensible, it is criminal, and it's beyond the lowest of the low to sexually abuse a patient that's in your care, particularly one that cannot resist, has no defense mechanisms, and cannot consent to any sort of sexual encounter. So that's just beyond reprehensible, and that's not really what I want to focus on in this episode. I want to focus on our role as CNAs and how this impacts our day-to-day activities. So one of the questions that's being thrown around out there in mainstream media is, how can caregivers take care of a patient day in and day out and not recognize the signs of pregnancy? And the first thing that I want to say is, I completely understand that this is not the thought process of the CNAs working in long-term care. You don't expect your patients that you've been caring for 20 years that has had absolutely no signs of being sexually active and cannot consent to any sort of sexual activity. Your mindset is not in that place where you're looking for signs of pregnancy. It's just not something that should even happen. So I understand from that standpoint that CNAs, you're not thinking along those lines when you're taking care of these completely dependent patients. But is it possible that somebody can be pregnant and deliver an infant? Now, I don't know if the infant was full term or preterm. That's something that I really don't know. Of course, nobody knows exactly when the infant was conceived because that was some sort of illicit sexual encounter. The patient obviously can't tell us when that occurred. But is it possible that this patient may have had a little bit of weight gain, a little baby bump, maybe had not had a regular menstrual cycle? All of those things may have occurred. And is it possible that these things may have been missed by CNAs? So I want to look at these kind of one at a time going forward, because these are things that the mainstream media is basically, lambasting caregivers for missing. So I want to kind of look at this. And now understand that I am not involved in this patient's care. I don't know what their care plan is. I don't know the level of care involved, but I do want to kind of address these issues one by one. So the first is it possible the patient had weight gain? Yes. Certainly most pregnancies result in weight gain, but not all result in weight gain. And if the patient particularly had been on a calorie restricted diet because she has no real exercise, no real activity requirements, chances are that patient had been on a very specific calorie controlled diet, which means that she's not eating for two. She's not taking in those extra calories that most pregnant women take in to support the growing fetus. Now, this is especially possible if the patient was being tube fed. Now, I don't know, again, whether she was or not, but if the patient was being tube fed, she was on a very controlled, calorie restricted diet, which would probably not result in any weight gain, even with pregnancy. So that's issue number one. The second issue is, was there a baby bump? Why didn't the CNAs notice that that the patient was pregnant? Well, this kind of ties into that first one. If we have such a restricted calorie intake, then the fetus probably wasn't growing all that much. And it's not uncommon for patients that are tube fed. Now, again, I don't know if the patient was tube fed, but it's not uncommon for patients that are tube fed to have a little bit more of a tummy pooch that may have hidden a growing pregnancy. Now, the third one is a little bit more concerning. If the patient was unable to speak, nonverbal, non-communicative, which by all news reports, it really seems that that was the patient's disposition, then she may not have been able to tell caregivers about the changes that her body was going through. And it's not uncommon for patients that are unable to perform self-care to have hormonal replacements to prevent periods from occurring, or to have very irregular or have no periods at all because of the trauma that the body has endured. So it's possible that this patient already had irregular menstrual cycles, or maybe no noticeable menstrual cycles at all. So this patient may not have had regular menstrual cycles to begin with. And menstrual cycles usually are not tracked by caregiving teams. So that brings up a question, should they be? If your patient is having menstrual cycles, is in childbearing age, but isn't able to perform any type of self-care and is non-communicative, that puts them at risk. They're at risk for physical trauma, sexual abuse, all different types of things. So we have to start looking at these things and trying to decide, how would we notice if our patients are being sexually abused by patients in the facility, outsiders or family members that come in, or even our own caregiving system, which apparently is what happened in this particular instance. Just because somebody works in healthcare does not automatically mean that they're not able to perform these horrible acts of sexual violence. So we have to kind of look at our own strategies of protecting our patients in these at-risk populations. So is it possible that these patients, or that this patient, had a pregnancy and caregivers were unaware of it? Yes, I do believe it is possible. But what would you do as a CNA if you suspected that your patient, who is of childbearing age, was pregnant? Now, especially if you've got somebody who's nonverbal and non-communicative and unable to consent, and you have some suspicions that maybe something isn't quite right, what would you do with that information? If you report it to the nurse, who in this instance was the one that actually abused the patient and caused the pregnancy, what is your next step? What would you do with that information? So I'm going to toss this over to you guys. What do you think about this? First of all, how would you react if tomorrow you went to work and one of your patients suddenly and without warning gave birth? The second question is, what would you do if you suspected that one of the patients in your care was being sexually or physically abused by someone in a position of authority? And the third question is it possible that these observations were missed by caregivers because they just weren't thinking along those lines? So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave me a comment below and let me know what you think about it. It's a horrible situation, and we have to remember as caregivers that we're not just there to do mouth care or help patients ambulate or feed them or keep their environment clean. We're also there to make sure that they're safe. safe from others, but also safe from us as well. So keep your eyes open, guys. I don't want to create a culture of hostility or tattletaling, but remember that if your patients can't speak up for themselves, that's our job. So keep your eyes open and make sure that you're reporting anything that's a little abnormal, out of the ordinary, things that make you go, Make sure you're reporting those to someone in authority. And if that doesn't get addressed, go up your chain of command. Please make sure that you like our channel, hit the bell for notifications so you know when we post a new video, and subscribe. Remember that we still have every other day, we have a weekly session, Motivation Monday, Test Tip Tuesday, Workplace Wednesday, of course, NewsFlash Thursday, Fashion Friday, and Career Spotlight Saturday. And we'd love to see you tune in for each one of those. Until next time, happy caregiving.